Europe has a blind spot, and it's called North Korea. For years, the Pyongyang regime was dismissed as a faraway problem, an isolated dictatorship with little relevance or threat to the security of Europe. But it's time for a rethink, and fast.
North Korea is way too dangerous to be further ignored. We need to put North Korea on the agenda, on the political agenda, also and especially now as Europeans. We cannot simply wait for the US to solve this issue for us. But since we are directly threatened by the North Koreans now, in the cyberspace, in the non-proliferation field, but also through their military support of Russia's war against Ukraine, we need to deal with this country as a serious security threat.
That's Eric Balbach. He's a Korea expert at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Eric's been helping me break down why Europe needs to take North Korean leader Kim Jong-un seriously. After all, his troops are fighting on European soil. They're helping Russia in its war on Ukraine. Kim Jong-un has forged a strategic partnership with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and that's reshaping the continent's threat landscape. And they're bankrolling all of this through cyber attacks in Europe and beyond. So has Europe been asleep at the wheel? And more importantly, how can it reduce the threat? But first, how did we get here?
North Korea is now a much bigger threat to Europe than it was 10 years ago. First element, of course, is North Korea's support of Russia's war against the Ukraine. But at a critical time in 2023, it allowed Russia of course, to go back into the offense, especially in the Kursk region, where the North Korean soldiers were deployed to mainly. And it also allowed them to keep up their firepower through the massive North Korean export of weapons. And that was not only artillery shells, it was also ballistic missiles. And of course, that came in a situation in which Russian stockpile was severely decreasing. That's the first element to it. The second element, of course, is North Korea's increased cyber threat. If we read the latest report of the EU Cybersecurity Agency, we see that, or read that North Korea is the third most state-sponsored cyber actor against Europe, following only China and Russia. Where North Korea is in a much better position today strategically than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, North Korea was under harsh sanctions. And of course, that is fundamentally different today. North Korea has achieved one of its major objectives, namely the weakening of the sanctions regime, a better strategic position, more flexible, more room for strategic maneuvering. And all that they achieved without engaging in another round of denuclearization talks. It was North Korea that lended political support very early on to Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And Russia paid this back by politically supporting North Korea. And that meant not only to basically work against any new sanctions that have been adopted in the Security Council. They achieved this also by closer military cooperation with Russia, meaning they are in a much better position now economically, financially, due to the massive amount of money they made.
All right, let's explore that relationship with Russia. Is it a genuine alliance or more a marriage of convenience?
It's a little bit of both, I would say. In the first place, it is a win-win situation at the moment. The Russians needed weapons, especially in 2023, 2024. When their stockpile seriously depleted, they needed weapons, they needed support through manpower, and this is what the North Koreans offered them. And the North Koreans, in return, received both financial support but also humanitarian support in form of deliveries of food, of energy. They apparently also received military support from the Russians to perfect their missile program, their space program, and also, of course, through the massive support of the Russians or import of North Korean weapons, that also meant that North Korean defense industrial base also further grows.
But here's the part that might surprise people. The turning point in all of this didn't start with weapons or cyber attacks or even Russia. It started with diplomacy, specifically when it broke down. Let's go back to the meetings between Donald Trump in his first term in office and Kim Jong-un. What happened there?
We all remember the 2017 times of fire and fury and Little Rocket Man and my nuclear button is bigger than yours. The back and forth between Trump and Kim Jong-un, basically, which then led through South Korean mediation to a so-called summit diplomacy between the two countries, meaning repeated meetings between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un during Donald Trump's first term. And relatively successful Singapore summit was then preceded by the second summit in Hanoi, which was to the North Koreans much more than a failed diplomatic endeavor, than a failed diplomatic meeting. It was a critical juncture for the North Koreans. The way Hanoi failed, the Hanoi summit failed for Kim Jong-un was very, very strategically dangerous time for Kim Jong-un. This traveled back to North Korea with nothing basically to bring to the North Koreans. And this failed summit for North Korea was the beginning of a whole new foreign and security policy strategy that the North Koreans basically made public in 2021. They shifted away from dialogue with the US and South Korea, but also with the Europeans. Everything stopped from then on. And they leaned closer towards Russia and China. Russia and China being willing and more open to have better relations with North Korea. And the geostrategic, geopolitical context played in North Korea's hands through both the increasing US-China conflict, which made North Korea more interesting for China then as a state in the Indo-Pacific state, and of course the invasion of the Ukraine by the Russians then brought these two countries also closer together. It's not an ideologically based relationship, but it has at least elements of an alliance, and this is what we can see in the document Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin signed, which has a defensive clause in it, meaning that if one country is attacked, the other will support it militarily. I'm very skeptical if the Russians would simply honor this commitment, because through the alliance system with South Korea, that of course would mean the Russians would have to fight against the Americans.
Let's dive into North Korea's cybersecurity threat now. What exactly are they up to, and who are they targeting?
These cyber attacks are mainly information gathering campaigns, but also malware campaigns, as well as to get access to certain institutions, defense companies, for example, but also experts working on North Korea, government-related institutions. And the other side of North Korean cyber activities in Europe is to make money through bitcoins, for example, and gathering. I mean, if we look at last year, we saw huge attacks by the North Koreans, not only in Europe, but globally. And they gathered billions of dollars worth of cryptocurrency, which then, of course, have to be transferred into legal currency. This is another challenge in its own. But it only goes to show how sophisticated North Korea has become in this area. And we can trace this back mainly also due to the massive international sanctions, which led the North Koreans to look for other ways to make money to support and finance their military complex.
So North Korea has been filling its pockets, robbing billions through illegal cyber activities. But what have European governments and institutions been doing to stop them?
In a broader scale, I would say that we still don't really grasp how active North Korea has become in the European space here. There are activities and there are intelligence sharing activities between, for example, European countries like Germany and the South Koreans, especially on North Korean cyber threats. There are things which are ongoing, especially in the European and the EU context. We have a cyber dialogue with the South Koreans where we share on a very regular basis, and a digital partnership where we share especially those things with the South Koreans on a regular basis. In the context of NATO, South Korea is a member of NATO cyber security cluster of excellence. So in the multilateral context, a lot is happening. On the broader scale, I would say we still underestimate what the North Koreans are capable of. And that this is a state-driven strategy. This is a state-sponsored, state-financed strategy. And we have to take this very seriously.
So what does taking it seriously look like?
Well, first of all, we need the infrastructure basically in place and the institutional infrastructure in place to actually go deeper in our security cooperation with the South Koreans, with the Japanese, with the Australians and so forth. We now have, since I think December 2024, a so-called security and defense partnership with the South Koreans between the EU and South Korea. And of course, this takes time to implement. But it's a good sign. Space security, maritime security, cyber security, non-proliferation, all these things, we have a structured dialogue with the South Koreans. There are things already going on, but a lot more needs to be done. One of the major steps, concrete, tangible steps the EU should take and EU member states should take is to finalize a security information agreement with the South Koreans that allows for much deeper intelligence sharing with that country. The Russians support the North Koreans in their military modernization as well, which is then a direct threat. It's crucial that we have these agreements in place that allow for very deep intelligence sharing. This is one step, and the next step would also be we have to prepare in the context of NATO, for example, also in the context of the EU, for all scenarios on the Korean Peninsula. What would we do if a military conflict would break out? These scenario plannings too are, I think, very, very important.
So how should the West approach North Korea?
North Korea today is not the North Korea of 2018, 2019, when we last dealt with that country diplomatically. North Korea considered itself now as a full-fledged nuclear power. It even gets political support in this position by the Russians now. The Russian foreign minister acknowledged that North Korea is now a nuclear power and that there is no, let's say, how did he mention it? He said something like, it makes no sense to have denuclearization dialogue with the North Koreans any longer because North Korea is now a nuclear power. So I'm not sure if the North Koreans would agree to any dialogue that is that has a clear objective of denuclearizing North Korea. I'm not sure if we are strategically in a better place if Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un meet again only on the top, because I think this was one of the major weaknesses of this previous summit diplomacy, that we had summit diplomacy, but not a stable working level base that would prepare the summits, that would, actually deal with the details of something so sensitive as a denuclearization of a country, which we don't have any historical parallels for.
I think we've learned that Pyongyang is more entrenched, more connected, and more capable than it was just a few years ago. It's impacting Europe through war, cyber operations, and strategic alliances. It's no longer a faraway problem, but instead a highly complex and evolving threat, and one Europe is only just beginning to confront. I'm Pablo Foley Elias. I'll see you again soon.